August 22nd, 1963, 5:47 a.m. 50 NYPD officers surrounded Bumpy Johnson's headquarters on 125th Street. They came with rifles, tear gas, and arrest warrants. 45 minutes later, they left with wounded officers and broken pride. 200 bullets were fired that morning. Windows shattered across 3 city blocks, but when the smoke cleared, Bumpy Johnson had vanished like smoke, leaving behind a message that would echo through law enforcement for decades. This is the story of the most violent police raid in Harlem history. 45 minutes of urban warfare that proved one man's intelligence could defeat an army's firepower. To understand why the NYPD sent 50 officers to arrest one man, you need to understand what was happening in Harlem in August 1963. Bumpy Johnson had just returned from 11 years in Alcatraz, and within 3 months, he'd rebuilt his empire faster than anyone thought possible. But this time was different. This time, federal agents were watching. The FBI had been building a case against Bumpy since his release, documenting every meeting, every transaction, every move he made. By August, they believed they had enough evidence to put him back in prison for life. The problem was jurisdiction. Bumpy's operations crossed state lines, involved federal crimes, but were based in New York City. The FBI wanted him arrested, but they needed local police to make the arrest. That's how Detective Captain Michael Brennan of the NYPD found himself leading the largest police raid in Harlem's history. Brennan was a 20-year veteran who'd built his reputation fighting organized crime in Brooklyn and Manhattan. He'd arrested dozens of mob bosses, broken up countless criminal operations, and never failed to bring in a target, but he'd never gone after anyone like Bumpy Johnson. "This isn't just another arrest," FBI agent Robert Patterson told Brennan during their planning meeting on August 20th. "Johnson is the most dangerous criminal in Harlem. He's got an organization, he's got weapons, and he's got nothing to lose." "How dangerous are we talking?" Brennan asked. "Dangerous enough that we're recommending 50 officers, full tactical gear, and dawn entry when his security is lightest." Brennan studied the surveillance photos of Bumpy's headquarters, a 3-story building on 125th Street that housed what appeared to be a legitimate real estate company. During the day, it was filled with businessmen in suits conducting normal transactions. But the FBI's wiretaps had revealed it was the nerve center of Bumpy's entire operation. "What kind of resistance are we expecting?" "Unknown," Agent Patterson replied, "but assume armed and extremely dangerous." The raid was planned for dawn on August 22nd, when surveillance indicated Bumpy would be in the building with minimal security. 50 officers would surround the building, 20 would enter through the front, and 30 would cover all possible escape routes. It was a solid plan with one fatal flaw. They were planning to arrest Bumpy Johnson as if he were an ordinary criminal. August 22nd, 1963, 5:47 a.m. The raid began with precision timing. 20 patrol cars surrounded the block simultaneously. Officers took positions behind vehicles, in doorways, and on rooftops. Within 3 minutes, every exit from the building was covered. Detective Captain Brennan led the entry team through the front door of what appeared to be a quiet office building. The lobby was empty, except for a security guard who offered no resistance. The elevators were working normally. Everything seemed routine. That should have been their first warning. At 5:52 a.m., Brennan's team reached the 3rd floor, where surveillance indicated Bumpy's office was located. They found a reception area with expensive furniture, filing cabinets, and a secretary's desk, but no people. "Building's empty," Officer Rodriguez reported over the radio. "No sign of Johnson or anyone else." "Keep searching," Brennan replied. "Check every room, every closet, every possible hiding place." At 5:55 a.m., Officer Martinez found what they were looking for, a hidden door behind a bookshelf that led to Bumpy's real office. It was a large room with a mahogany desk, multiple phones, and filing cabinets that probably contained evidence of every crime Bumpy had committed since his return. But still no Bumpy Johnson. "Captain," Officer Chen called from across the room, "you need to see this." Chen was pointing at the window that faced 125th Street. Written in the dust on the glass, in neat block letters, were 4 words: "Welcome to Harlem, gentlemen." That's when Brennan realized they'd walked into a trap. At 5:57 a.m., the lights went out. The building's electricity was cut from somewhere inside the structure, plunging the entire 3 floors into darkness. Officers immediately drew flashlights, but the beams revealed something that made Brennan's blood run cold. Every window in the building had been barricaded from the inside with steel plates. Every door except the front entrance had been welded shut. The 20 officers inside the building were trapped. "All units, we have a situation," Brennan radioed to the officers outside. "Building is secured from within. We may have walked into an ambush." The response came from outside. "Captain, we've got movement on the rooftops. Multiple individuals with long guns taking positions." At 5:58 a.m., the war began. The first shots came from the roof of the building, directly across from Bumpy's headquarters. Sniper fire that shattered the windshields of 3 patrol cars and sent the outside officers diving for cover. But the shots weren't aimed to kill. They were aimed to pin down the police officers and prevent them from entering the building where their colleagues were trapped. Inside the darkened building, Brennan's team found themselves in a different kind of nightmare. The steel-plated windows made it impossible to see out or shoot out. The welded doors made it impossible to escape, and somewhere in the darkness they could hear movement. "Johnson," Brennan shouted into the darkness, "we know you're in here. Come out with your hands up." The response came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Bumpy's voice echoed through the building's intercom system. "Captain Brennan, welcome to my office. I hope you like what I've done with the place. This is over, Johnson. You're surrounded." "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the ones who are surrounded." Outside, the sniper fire had escalated into a full firefight. Officers crouched behind cars, shooting at muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops throughout the block. But every time they tried to advance toward the building, concentrated fire drove them back to cover. Inside the building, Brennan's team faced a different problem. They were trapped in a maze of offices and hallways, in complete darkness, with an enemy who knew the terrain better than they did. At 6:15 a.m., Officer Martinez reported the first casualty over the radio. "Officer down. Rodriguez took a bullet in the shoulder. We need medical assistance." But the medical assistants couldn't get to them. The building was still under siege from multiple directions, and any attempt to breach the entrances drew immediate gunfire. "How the hell did he set this up?" Officer Chen asked, as the team took cover in what had been the reception area. Brennan was asking himself the same question. This wasn't a spontaneous resistance. This was a planned, coordinated defense that had taken weeks or months to prepare. Bumpy Johnson had known this raid was coming, long before the NYPD did. The answer came over the intercom again. "Captain, I've been watching your surveillance teams for 3 weeks. Did you really think you could watch me without me watching you?" It was a chilling revelation. While the FBI and NYPD had been planning their raid, Bumpy had been planning his counter-raid. He'd turned their own surveillance against them, using their predictable patterns to set up the perfect trap. At 6:25 a.m., 30 minutes into the firefight, Brennan made a tactical decision that probably saved his men's lives. "All units, cease fire and hold positions. Johnson, I want to talk." The shooting stopped. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the gunfire had been. "I'm listening, Captain." Bumpy's voice came through the intercom. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. You came into my neighborhood with 50 officers and 50 guns, thinking you could take me like some street corner dealer. But this is Harlem, Captain, and in Harlem, I don't just have an organization, I have a community." Brennan looked around at his trapped men. "What's your point?" "My point is that every person on these rooftops, every person who's been shooting at your officers for the past 30 minutes, they're not professional criminals. They're shopkeepers, barbers, taxi drivers, working people who believe in protecting their neighborhood from outside invasion." It was a psychological blow, as devastating as any physical attack. The NYPD wasn't fighting a criminal organization. They were fighting a community that saw them as invaders. At 6:35 a.m., 40 minutes into the siege, Brennan received a radio call that changed everything. "Captain, this is Chief Morrison. What's your status?" "Chief, we're trapped inside the building with multiple wounded. The entire block is hostile. We're facing organized resistance from civilian snipers. Understood. I'm ordering tactical withdrawal. Get your men out of there. Sir, we came here to arrest Johnson. Johnson's not in that building, Captain. Our surveillance teams just spotted him 3 miles away, having breakfast at Small's Paradise. He's been there since 5:30 a.m. The realization hit Brennan like a physical blow. They'd spent 40 minutes fighting to arrest a man who wasn't even there. Bumpy Johnson had orchestrated the entire battle from a distance, using his organization and his community to create a military-style diversion. At 6:40 a.m., the shooting stopped entirely. Bumpy's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Captain Brennan, your chief has ordered you to withdraw. I'm going to make that possible. In 60 seconds, the front door will be opened. Your wounded officers will be escorted out by medical personnel. Your vehicles will be allowed to leave without further incident. Consider this a professional courtesy. And you, I'll be finishing my breakfast. If you want to arrest me, you know where to find me. But next time, Captain, come alone. This neighborhood doesn't like invaders." At 6:41 a.m., exactly 60 seconds later, the front door of the building opened. Medical personnel, who turned out to be local residents with first aid training, entered to help the wounded officers. The steel plates were removed from the windows. The lights came back on. The siege was over. The aftermath of the August 22nd raid became a case study in police tactics and community relations. The NYPD had deployed 50 officers, fired over 200 rounds of ammunition, and wounded 3 of their own officers. They'd failed to arrest their target, failed to seize any evidence, and failed to demonstrate that they could control Harlem through force. But Bumpy Johnson had proved something more significant. He demonstrated that his power in Harlem wasn't based on fear or violence. It was based on community support and strategic intelligence. He'd turned a neighborhood into a fortress and ordinary citizens into defenders. The FBI agents who'd planned the raid were forced to write a report that essentially admitted defeat. Subject demonstrated sophisticated defensive capabilities and community support that rendered traditional law enforcement tactics ineffective. Captain Brennan, to his credit, learned from the experience. When he was promoted to chief of detectives 2 years later, he implemented new policies for community policing that recognized the difference between criminals and community leaders. But the real lesson of the August 22nd raid was simpler and more profound. In a community where police were seen as occupiers rather than protectors, even the best tactical plans would fail. Bumpy Johnson understood this. The NYPD learned it the hard way. The 45-minute siege on 125th Street became legend in Harlem, not because Bumpy had defeated the police, but because he'd proved that intelligence, preparation, and community support could overcome superior firepower. When local residents talked about that morning for decades afterward, they didn't remember it as a criminal escaping justice. They remembered it as their neighborhood defending itself against outside aggression. And that, perhaps, was Bumpy Johnson's greatest victory of all. If this story of strategy, community, and the most intense police raid in Harlem history captivated you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who understands that the most effective resistance isn't always violent, it's psychological. And in the comments, let me know, was this community defense or criminal resistance? Next week, we're revealing the classified police files on this raid that the NYPD tried to keep secret for 60 years. You won't want to miss that.